Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today we're thinking about power and conflict poetry for AQA GCSE English Literature, and I'm going to be providing you a summary and analysis of Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So, Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It's a really iconic, memorable poem by the then Poet Laureate about the Crimean War and a battle that took place, which led to hundreds of soldiers losing their lives as a result of an error of judgment by the generals. Now, in today's session, we are going to meet these needs, the assessment objectives for English literature. We're going to be understanding, and we will read the poem, and you will also understand some of the key uses of language as well as the form and structure, and we'll be thinking about the context too. So by the end of our short time together, we should have good knowledge of all of the, to cover all of the assessment objectives. So we'll start with thinking about what the poem's about before we read it. So Tennyson's poem celebrates the lives of soldiers of the Light Brigade who were ordered to charge the enemy in the Crimean War. It was a terrible strategic decision and hundreds of soldiers were slaughtered. It's a really famous event, and it's something that is commemorated in this poem. So we'll start now with a reading of it and then we'll move on to the analysis. Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back through the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honour the charge they made, honour the Light Brigade, noble 600. Okay. We now think about how we need to structure our response. So on the day of the exam, if this is the name poem or if it's a poem that you choose to use to analyse the name poem, to compare to the name poem rather, we want to start by explaining just very, very briefly what the poems are about. So only a couple of sentences about each poem is needed from us, but that's going to be our first paragraph. We're going to talk about how the poems relate to the theme in the question. And here's an example from me, and I'm aiming to be relatively concise. So Charge of the Light Brigade explores the horrors that befell soldiers during the Crimean War. It criticises the decisions made by generals, but informs us that war is an honourable and glorious way to die, sacrificing yourself for your country. His attitudes towards tend to contrast those of many 20th century war poets. So certainly if you're comparing this to something like Exposure by Wilfred Owen, they've got very different attitudes to war. The second paragraph tells us about the structure in each of the poems. So you need to think about whether or not you can make a comment on the rhyme scheme or the metre of each poem. And here's an example from me. So we've got dactylic metre here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, half a league, half a league. We've got dactylic metre in the poem. And that's really effective as it reflects the sounds of the charge and the beating of the hooves of the soldiers' horses. It's as if we're placed directly into the battle by Tennyson to relive the horrors the soldiers experienced. Tennyson, who was the poet laureate, wanted his poem to live on in the memory of the soldiers, which is why he opted to write in memorable ballad form. In front of you now is the only flashcard you're going to need for this poem. So once we've shown the examiner that we know what the poems are about and how they relate to the question, and we've explored structure, it's then time for us to get into analysis of language. And you may well have annotated every single line of the poem and colour-coded your anthology, but in all honesty, when it comes to the exam, in 45 minutes, you're only going to use 3 or 4 quotes from each poem. So your job is to know confidently 3 or 4 quotes for the poem and what to say about those references. So here we have 4 for you to explore now. So we've got half a league, half a league, half a league onward. We've got a bit of repetition here. You can comment on that use of dactylic meter here. But this is the opening of the poem, and it throws us straight into the midst of battle and makes us feel as if we're there. The rhythm of the charge and the horses is really reflected in the meter here and the repetition. We've got into the valley of death, and this has got biblical allusions here. This phrase is something that is an intertextual reference to the Bible. So it's got that hinting at sacrifice and righteousness here in that sort of use of religious language. We've got stormed at with shot and shell. So the sibilance here is something that reflects the sounds of the shelling that the soldiers would have experienced. And this is something that's repeated in the poem. His use of repetition is there just to emphasise the idea that these horrors were inescapable. And we've got this wonderful rhetorical question at the end: when can their glory fade? So we can talk about the idea that this is meant to challenge our perceptions and also commemorate the sacrifice that was made. But we've also got the idea of glory here, the idea that the death in war, even when it's in error, is something that's glorious. And the idea of war being filled with glory is something that's definitely in contrast to the representations of war that we get from people like Wilfred Owen. Okay, so you should be able to explain what the purpose of the poem is. You should be able to explain key uses in the language. Feel free to go back and make your own flashcard using the references that we've looked at today. But you should be able, by memory, to be able to reference a text. What structure does the poem have and what effect does this have? That's something that for this poem you definitely want to be able to explore if it's a poem you need to comment on in the exam. How does this poem represent war, and how is this poem different to many of the others in the cluster? And what is the context of the poem? Make sure you know these things, and if you need to revisit any of the content in this video, do so in order to get yourself ready for the exam. Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content. Feel free to ask for something you'd like to see me cover in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and keep revising.